My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 69 years old, and until last Tuesday, I was the woman everyone at Blue Harbor Senior Care pretended not to see, right up until the second they needed someone to blame. At 9:12 a.m., a calendar notification popped up on my screen like a polite little knife. Transition conversation, that's what they call it now. Not termination, not layoff, not even forced retirement, which would at least be honest. Transition. I stared at the invite long enough for my coffee to cool, and when I blinked it was still there, bright, cheerful, and final. I'd seen this exact meeting title used on 3 other people in the last year. First it was Tom, the maintenance supervisor with a bad knee who'd been there 22 years. Then Nina, the night shift charge nurse who complained about understaffing too loudly. Then Mr. Albright, the dietary manager who refused to sign a food safety log he hadn't checked. Every time it was transition. Every time the person walked out with a cardboard box and a smile that looked glued on. Blue Harbor Senior Care was a network of assisted living and memory care facilities spread across 3 states. On paper, it was clean and comforting. Warm beige brochures, staged photos of seniors playing bingo, and slogans about dignity. But I didn't work in the brochure. I worked in compliance, which meant I worked in the part of the building where truth lived like mold. Hidden, dangerous, and always spreading. My official title was Quality and Compliance Coordinator. The job sounded harmless enough that people at family barbecues nodded politely and changed the subject. But the real job was this. I checked medication logs to ensure residents actually received what was prescribed. I tracked incident reports, falls, wandering, injuries, aggression, and memory care. I reviewed staffing ratios, overtime patterns, and missing nursing notes. I compiled the documentation we submitted to state regulators and, when applicable, federal programs tied to Medicare and Medicaid funding. I was the person who knew what happened after the tour ended. And for months, I'd been pushing against a tide that kept rising. Not because I wanted to be difficult, because the people living in our building couldn't always speak for themselves. Some had dementia, some had strokes, some were on oxygen. Some were too frightened to complain because they didn't want retaliation from the aides who helped them bathe. So when something went wrong, it didn't come with a siren. It came with a missing signature, a misplaced chart, a fall that wasn't documented until the bruises turned purple. A resident whose family got told, "She's just aging," when the real truth was she hadn't been given her medication properly for days. And I'd been documenting all of it. I didn't panic at the meeting invite. Panic is for surprises. This was pattern. This was math. I'd sent too many emails, asked too many questions, stopped too many shortcuts with my Evelyn wants to see the documentation first. So I saved my current file, backed up my compliance folder to my personal encrypted drive, something I started doing after Tom got fired. And I went right back to work. Because if they were going to push me out, I wanted my desk clean and my conscience cleaner. Still, there was a strange ache in my chest as the hours ticked toward 3:30. Not fear, something closer to grief. Because I wasn't a kid starting over. I was 69. My joints hurt when it rained. I kept a heating pad under my desk and pretended it was for back support. I'd been widowed 6 years ago. My retirement wasn't a fantasy of cruises and golf. It was a spreadsheet of prescriptions and property taxes. And Blue Harbor knew that. They knew older employees didn't jump jobs easily. They knew we were quieter targets. At 1:05 p.m., Marissa from HR walked past my cubicle and smiled the way people smile at funerals, tight and practiced. "Hey, Evelyn," she said, "how's your day going?" The question wasn't real. It was a temperature check. I stared at my monitor again. On the screen was a medication administration record. A MAR for a memory care resident named Harold Bishop, 84 years old, diagnosed with Alzheimer's. According to the log, Harold had received his insulin at 8:00 a.m. and 8:00 p.m. every day for 2 weeks. Perfect. Too perfect. Because Harold had been hospitalized 3 days earlier with dangerously high blood sugar, and his daughter had been sobbing at the nurse's station, asking how that could happen if he'd been getting his insulin. The nurse on duty had said, "Sometimes these things happen." But sometimes these things happen was code. It was code for We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough training. We don't have enough time. And someone is filling out paperwork after the fact. Because the paperwork is what the auditors see, I zoomed in on the signature. They looked similar, too similar. Same slant, same pressure, same lazy loop in the H. I opened the staff schedule. The aide whose initials appeared on half the entries, she wasn't even scheduled those mornings. My stomach tightened. Not because this was new, because it wasn't. At 2:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, unknown. Stop digging. You're not going to like what you find. I stared at it. Then I checked the number again. No caller ID name, no context. No reason I didn't respond. I took a screenshot and saved it. Then I set the phone face down, like it was a snake. At 3:05 p.m., the office started to shift. It was subtle at first. Voices dropping, conversations ending when I approached. Even the copier seemed quieter, as if paper had learned to hold its breath. I stood and picked up my cardigan from the back of my chair. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing through practicalities. If they fired me, would my health insurance extend through the month? Would they offer severance? Would they claim performance issues so I couldn't collect unemployment? Unemployment. Would they try to make me sign something on the spot? I'd watched them do it to Tom. They sat him down with HR and told him it was budget restructuring. Then they slid a document across the table that included a clause about confidentiality and non-disparagement. Tom, confused and scared, signed. 2 days later, they posted his job listing online with a different title. At 3:22 p.m., I saved my last file and shut my laptop halfway. 15 minutes. I stood up. That's when I heard it. A sound so ordinary most people wouldn't notice. The front lobby badge printer. It whirred once, paused, then whirred again and again. 3 badges, 3 visitors, unscheduled. I froze. Not because visitors were unusual, because of the timing. Visitors never arrived at 3:22. Families came in the morning or early evening. Vendors had set times. Inspectors announced themselves days ahead unless something was wrong. The woman's hair was pulled back tight, silver threaded through black, and she wore an ID lanyard with a seal that made my throat go dry. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I didn't move at first. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. Then I saw the receptionist, young girl named Tessa, pick up the phone with shaking fingers. She glanced around, eyes wide, as if trying to find an adult. Her voice carried down the hallway. "There are federal agents here," she whispered into the receiver. "They're asking for compliance. They're asking for Evelyn Carter." My pulse didn't spike into fear. It sharpened into something else, recognition. I turned away from the executive suite. I walked toward the lobby. Each step felt like walking into a storm you've been warning people about for months. Only now the lightning is here, and everyone suddenly believes you. The woman with the lanyard looked up as I approached. Her eyes were flat, professional, practiced. The eyes of someone who had listened to hundreds of lies and memorized the sound each lie made. "Evelyn Carter?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She extended her hand. "Special Agent Renee Alvarez, Office of Inspector General," she said. "These are investigators Miles Kent and Robert Shaw. We're here to conduct an unscheduled compliance inspection related to your facilities. Reporting, incident documentation, and billing practices." The words landed like a heavy box on my chest. Billing practices. I could already hear Daniel Klein's voice upstairs, smooth and confident, saying, "We are fully compliant." Agent Alvarez continued, calm as snowfall, "We need a private space. We also need immediate access to your records, incident logs, medication administration records, staffing schedules, training certificates, and your correspondence relating to regulatory reporting." Before I could answer, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Marissa from HR appeared at the edge of the lobby, cheeks flushed, breath too quick. "Excuse me," she said with that corporate smile that only existed to hide panic. "Can I help you? We weren't notified of any inspection today." Agent Alvarez turned slowly. "Federal inspections under statutory authority do not require advance notice," she said. "We are here now. Your cooperation is required." Marissa's smile twitched. "Well, of course," she said, voice wobbling. "Absolutely. Let me just notify our regional director." "You can notify whoever you like," Alvarez replied. "In the meantime, we'll be speaking with Miss Carter." Marissa's eyes flicked to me. For a split second, they weren't corporate. They were furious, like I'd done this. Like my existence had summoned the storm. I kept my face still. Conference room D is empty, I said. This way. As I led them down the hallway, I felt the entire building wake up. Doors cracked open, heads peeked out. A nurse stared like she'd seen a ghost. Because here's what people don't say out loud in elder care. If federal agents are in your lobby, it means someone might have been hurt, and it means someone might be going to prison. Conference room D was small, windowless, and always slightly too cold. Agent Alvarez sat at the head of the table. The investigators sat to either side. I sat across from them, folding my hands to keep them from trembling. Alvarez opened a thin folder. "Miss Carter," she said, "I'm going to be direct. Your facility submitted quarterly compliance documentation, indicating that incident reporting is timely and complete. Medication administration audits show no significant variances, and required staff training is current." She slid a document across the table. It was a summary form. Boxes checked. Dates filled in. Everything clean. And there at the bottom was a line with my printed name beneath it. Evelyn Carter. My stomach dropped. "That's my name," I said carefully. "Did you personally verify every item in this report before it was submitted?" Alvarez asked. I stared at the neat check marks. Then at the date. Then at the signature block. My signature wasn't there. But my name was. "Can you explain why your name appears on compliance attestations? You say you didn't verify." "Yes," I said. "But before I do, are you recording this conversation?" Alvarez nodded. "Audio recording. Documentation purposes only. You are not under investigation at this time." "Good, because if the truth was going to come out, I wanted it on record." "I will cooperate," I said. "But I need something stated clearly in this recording." Alvarez's eyes narrowed slightly. "Go ahead." "In about 8 minutes, I said. I was scheduled to be called into a meeting with HR and our regional director for what they referred to as a transition conversation. In this company, that's a forced retirement meeting." The investigators exchanged glances. Alvarez didn't blink. "You were scheduled to be separated from employment today?" "Yes," I said. "At 3:30 p.m. And do you know why?" Investigator Shaw asked. "They'll say restructuring," I replied. "But the real reason is that I've spent the last several months documenting inconsistencies between what actually happens in this facility and what gets reported." Alvarez's posture changed. "Not dramatic, just a slight shift, like a microscope tightening focus. Start from the beginning," she said. "And don't leave anything out." So I did. I told them about the first time I noticed incident reports disappearing. A resident named Martha James, 92, fell in the hallway outside memory care. The fall should have triggered a full report. Time, location, witnesses, interventions, physician notification, family notification. Instead, 2 days later, when I went to log the incident, it wasn't there. I asked the charge nurse. She looked at the floor and said, "Daniel said we have too many falls on record. Families see the reports." I told Alvarez how the staffing schedule never matched the reality. On paper, the night shift had 3 aides. In reality, it was 2. Because the third was floating between wings, doing the work of 2 people and failing at both because she was human. I told them about Harold Bishop's insulin, about perfect paperwork and imperfect body, about missing training certifications that magically appeared as completed right before audits. Alvarez listened without interrupting, writing occasionally. Then she asked the question that turned the room colder. "Do you have proof?" I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I opened my bag and pulled out a small external drive. "I have email threads," I said. "Screenshots, staffing logs, original incident drafts before they were revised. Copies of internal directives telling staff to classify certain injuries as age-related, so they wouldn't count as reportable incidents." The investigators looked at the drive like it was a live grenade. "How long have you been keeping this?" Shaw asked. I hesitated, then told the truth. "Since Tom was fired," I said, "because I realized if they could erase him, they could erase the truth." Alvarez nodded once. "We'll need copies of everything," she said. "Today you can have them," I replied. "But there's more." Kent's eyebrows lifted. "More than incident suppression and documentation discrepancies. Yes, I said quietly, because this was the part I hadn't said out loud to anyone in the building. Not because I didn't want to, because once you say it, it becomes real. I leaned forward. Our facilities billing reports don't match our care delivery, I said. Services are being billed that residents aren't receiving. Therapy minutes, care levels, sometimes even medication management fees for residents who are self-administering. Or worse, residents who aren't getting meds on time at all. Silence. Alvarez's pen stopped moving. Those are serious allegations, she said. I know, I replied. And I didn't come to that conclusion lightly. Shaw spoke carefully. Who else knows this? I exhaled slowly. People know pieces, I said. Nurses know staffing is unsafe. Aides know they're drowning. Families know something feels off but can't prove. But the people who control the reporting, Daniel Klein and the corporate team above him, they know the whole picture. Alvarez closed the folder. Then she said very calmly, Ms. Carter, if your employer attempts to terminate you while we're conducting this inspection, that may constitute retaliation and obstruction. My throat tightened. Not relief yet, just a door cracking open. Then there was a knock at the conference room door. Sharp, aggressive, the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. Alvarez stood and opened it. Daniel Klein filled the doorway like he owned oxygen. Tall, gray at the temples, expensive suit. He wore that leadership expression that said he was angry but couldn't show it, not fully. His eyes landed on me first, and in them, I saw the truth. He knew exactly why the agents were here. Agent Daniel said smoothly, extending his hand as if this was a planned meeting. Daniel Klein, Regional Director. I'd like to understand why federal representatives are in our building, conducting interviews without notifying administration. Alvarez didn't take his hand. We don't require permission, she said. We are operating under statutory authority. Your cooperation is required. Daniel's smile tightened. I understand, he said, but I'd appreciate being informed when my staff are being questioned. Miss Carter is cooperating voluntarily, Alvarez replied, and based on what she has shared, we will be speaking with you next, along with anyone involved in reporting, incident classification, staffing decisions, and billing. For the first time, Daniel's face slipped. Just for a second, fear flickered there. Then he recovered. I have a meeting scheduled at 3:30, he said. Alvarez's voice was calm as ice. Cancel it. Daniel's gaze snapped to me again, and in that gaze was a warning, a promise. Alvarez stepped closer to the doorway, blocking him, controlling the frame like a courtroom. We'll begin with your compliance and billing documentation, she said. Now, Daniel nodded stiffly and backed away. But as he turned, he said something without looking at me, like throwing a knife over his shoulder. This is going to get messy, Evelyn. Then he walked off. Alvarez closed the door and faced me. Do you feel safe here? She asked. The question shouldn't have made my eyes sting. But it did, because nobody at Blue Harbor had asked me that in years. I don't know, I admitted. Not anymore. Alvarez handed me a business card. Direct number, she said. If anyone tries to intimidate you, retaliate, delete records, or isolate you, call immediately. I took the card like it was armor. Kent stood. We'll need access to the server logs and the original incident report system. Shaw added, and we'll need a list of all staff with edit permissions. Alvarez looked at me. Can you get us into the system? Yes, I said, but the moment we do, they'll know. She nodded once. Let them. As we left conference room D, the building felt different. Not safer, just awake. People were whispering. Phones were out. Doors were closing quickly as we passed. And somewhere down the hall, I saw Marissa from HR standing perfectly still, staring at me like I'd set the building on fire. At 3:31 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Another text, same unknown number. Unknown, you should have taken the retirement. Now you're in it. I stopped walking. My blood ran cold, because the first message could have been a bluff. This one felt like certainty, and certainty only comes from someone who knows what's about to happen next. If you're hooked so far, hit like and subscribe to Stories Untold, because part 2 is where the real truth shows up, and it's worse than paperwork. I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. Because Daniel Klein thought this was going to get messy. He was right, but he was wrong about one thing. The mess wasn't coming for me. It was coming for everyone who thought old people were easy to silence. And as I reached my desk, I noticed something that made my stomach drop all over again. The folder on my computer, my evidence backup folder, was open. I hadn't left it open. Someone had. And on the screen, a single file had been dragged into the trash. Not deleted yet, just moved, like a threat, like a demonstration. Like someone saying, "We can still reach you." Before we jump in, this is Stories Untold. Where are you watching from today? Drop your state in the comments. The trash icon on my desktop sat in the corner like it always did. But the file inside it didn't belong there. It was labeled. A spreadsheet I'd built by hand. One that compared what staff wrote down with what corporate reported. Falls that didn't happen. Bruises that weren't witnessed. Medication delays recorded in nurse notes but missing from official incident logs. It wasn't deleted yet, just moved. A warning, not a kill shot. I didn't touch the mouse. I didn't even breathe right. Because if someone had access to my computer while federal agents were in the building, then they weren't just bold. They were confident. And confidence meant power. I stood up slowly and walked away from my desk, as if I'd forgotten something in the hallway. My heart didn't pound. It tightened, like a fist closing around a throat. At the end of the hall, Special Agent Rene Alvarez was speaking quietly with Investigator Shaw. Their heads were tilted toward each other, their posture calm. The kind of calm that comes from training and experience. I approached and kept my voice low. "Someone opened my evidence folder," I said, "and moved one of my master exports into the trash." Alvarez's eyes sharpened instantly. "Did you leave your workstation unlocked?" she asked. "No," I said. "I never do." Shaw's jaw flexed. "Then someone has your credentials. Or the system had admin overrides. Or corporate had a back door." Alvarez didn't look alarmed. She looked pleased, in the way a hunter looks when an animal steps into view. "Show me," she said. We walked back to my desk together. People watched us from their doorways. Some looked worried. Some looked guilty. Some looked blank, like they'd practiced being blank. Alvarez stood behind my chair while I sat. Shaw stayed to my right, close enough that anyone approaching would have to go through him. I pointed at the open folder in the trash. "That file wasn't there 10 minutes ago," I said. Alvarez didn't ask what was in it yet. She asked something else. "Evelyn," she said softly, "who has access to your computer besides you?" "IT," I said. "And corporate has remote access for support." "Who in IT?" Shaw asked. I swallowed. "Jason Pike is the on-site technician," I said, "but he reports to corporate IT." Alvarez nodded once, like she'd expected that answer. "Okay," she said. "Do not restore the file yet." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because I want a snapshot of exactly what they did," she replied. "If we restore it now, we change the scene." Shaw leaned closer to the screen. I opened the file properties, hand steady because fear wasn't useful yet. Modified, 3:41 p.m. My forced retirement meeting had been scheduled for 3:30. They were already trying to erase my leverage while I was still standing in the building. Alvarez looked at me. "Any other strange activity?" she asked. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and showed her the text messages. "Stop digging. You're not going to like what you find. You should have taken the retirement. Now you're in it." Shaw's expression changed, tightened into something grim. Alvarez didn't react outwardly. She simply took my phone, photographed the screen with her own device, then handed mine back. "Keep every message," she said. "Don't block the number." "Why not?" I asked. "Because people who threaten you often get sloppy," she said, "and sloppy leaves fingerprints." A voice behind us cut through the air like a blade. "Evelyn." Marissa Vaughn from HR stood there. Alvarez stood up slowly, like she'd stood up 1,000 times to face a man who believed he was in charge. "You can speak," she said. "Right here." Daniel's smile didn't change. "Privately?" "No," Alvarez replied. Marissa glanced at the screen, at the open folder, at the trash icon, then back at me. Her eyes were hard. "Evelyn," she said, "this isn't helping anyone." Alvarez turned her head slightly. "It's helping the investigation," she said. Daniel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "We're fully cooperating," he said, "but we need to ensure resident care isn't disrupted by." "Resident care is already disrupted," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Daniel's eyes snapped to mine. In them was a cold message. Not now, not in front of them. Alvarez's gaze stayed on him. Ms. Carter has raised serious concerns, Alvarez said. We're now seeing potential evidence tampering. Do you want to explain why her workstation shows unauthorized activity while we're on site? Daniel gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they're caught and trying to make it sound harmless. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, he said. We have routine system updates. At 3:41 p.m., Shaw said during a federal inspection. Marissa stepped forward, voice firm. Evelyn, come with me, she said. We need to talk about your behavior. Alvarez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. No, she said. She stays within my line of sight. Daniel's smile died completely. Then he leaned slightly toward Alvarez, adopting the tone of a man who believed he could negotiate with pressure. Agent Alvarez, he said, I respect your role, but you have to understand Evelyn is older. She gets confused. She's been under stress. We've been trying to transition her into retirement gently because she's made several documentation errors recently. For a moment, my vision narrowed. That was the play. The oldest play in the book. Make the older woman sound unstable. Make her sound forgetful. Make her evidence look like mistakes. Alvarez's face remained expressionless. Are you attempting to discredit a potential witness? She asked. Daniel blinked. No, I'm simply. Alvarez cut him off. Anything you say regarding her competence, motive, or credibility will be documented, she said. Proceed carefully. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel turned toward me again, eyes flat. Evelyn, he said, why don't you go home for the day? Rest. We'll talk tomorrow. The suggestion sounded kind, it wasn't. Because if I went home, they'd have hours, maybe days, to clean the systems, rewrite records, coach staff, and destroy anything that still existed outside my drive. Alvarez answered for me. She's staying, she said. And we're accessing your server logs now. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'll have it assist, he said. Alvarez nodded. Good. Bring them. Daniel and Marissa walked away, their footsteps too controlled. The moment they were out of earshot, Shaw leaned closer. He's trying to paint you as unreliable, he said. I know, I replied. Alvarez looked at me with something like measured respect. Then you already understand what comes next, she said. What? I asked. They'll isolate you, she replied. They'll make you feel like you're hurting residents by speaking up. They'll try to get you alone. Don't let them, she paused. And they'll try to find what you haven't backed up yet. My throat tightened again, because there was something I hadn't told them. Not because it wasn't important. Because it was the kind of thing that could destroy more than a company. It could destroy families. I swallowed. There's one more folder, I said quietly. Not on the drive, Alvarez's eyes narrowed. Where in my home, I said. Paper copies, Shaw's brows lifted. Why paper? Because you can't remotely delete paper, I said. Alvarez nodded once. Good, she said. After today, do not go home alone. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, because it was insane that saying old people deserve safe care could make someone unsafe. Jason Pike arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a laptop and looking like someone who'd been yanked out of his chair mid-bite. He was young, late 20s, maybe. Soft face, tired eyes. The kind of kid who still believed his job was to fix printers. He froze when he saw the agents. Hi, he said. Marissa said there's a system request. Alvarez showed her badge again, close enough that he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Mr. Pike, she said. We need access logs for Ms. Carter's workstation in the compliance reporting portal. Now Jason's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Aye, okay, he said. Sure, I'll need corporate authorization too. Shaw's voice was calm. No, you won't. Jason's gaze flicked toward Daniel Klein's office down the hall, then back to Alvarez. His shoulders sagged. Okay, he said. Right, okay. He sat at my desk, hands shaking slightly as he typed. As he logged into the back-end system, I watched his face change. First confusion, then tension, then something close to fear. What? I asked quietly. Jason didn't answer immediately. He kept typing, eyes darting. Alvarez leaned in just enough to see the screen. Jason, she said, tell me what you're looking at. He swallowed hard. There's a remote session history, he said. On Evelyn's machine. From who? Shaw asked. Jason clicked. A name appeared. Not Jason's, not mine. A corporate admin account. I felt my stomach turn. That's not a person, I whispered. It's a master account, Jason said. It can access any workstation. Alvarez's voice stayed even. Who controls it? Jason hesitated, like his brain was trying to calculate what was safer, truth or loyalty. Corporate operations, he said finally. Or regional leadership. People like Daniel can request access. Shaw stared at the screen. And the session time, he asked. Jason highlighted it. 3:39 p.m., 3:44 p.m. The file moved at 3:41. My retirement meeting was 3:30. They didn't even wait for me to sit down and sign whatever paper they'd prepared. Alvarez straightened. Print this log, she said. Jason blinked. Print. Now, Alvarez repeated. Jason stood up so fast his chair squealed. He hurried toward the printer like he was running from something. And in the hallway, as he passed the open doorway of Daniel's office, Daniel appeared. He looked at Jason, then at Alvarez, then at me. His eyes were calm again. Too calm. I'm glad you found what you needed, Daniel said pleasantly. Alvarez held his gaze. We found evidence tampering, she said. Daniel gave a small shrug. Technology is messy, he said. You know that? Alvarez didn't blink. No, she said. People are messy. Technology keeps receipts. For the first time, Daniel's smile didn't return. He looked at me like he was choosing a new strategy. Then he said, Evelyn, could you step into my office for a moment? Just you and me. I want to clear up a misunderstanding. Shaw stepped forward slightly. She's not going anywhere alone, he said. Daniel held up his hands. Fine, he said. Bring your bodyguard. He turned and walked back into his office. Alvarez nodded at Shaw. Shaw looked at me. Stay close. My legs felt heavier as I followed them into Daniel's office, like my body wanted to refuse the room. Daniel's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who managed elder care like a business plan. Framed certificates, glass desk, golf photo. A smiling picture of him shaking hands with a state senator. The kind of office where warm words are used like weapons. Daniel sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. Evelyn, he began, you've had a long career. You've served seniors. You've done good work. I didn't respond, because this was how it started. Praise first, then pressure, then poison, Daniel continued. But what you're doing right now, he said softly, is going to hurt the residents. Shaw's face didn't change. Daniel's eyes slid to him. Families will panic, Daniel said. Staff will quit. Care will suffer. And if this facility loses funding, if the state freezes admissions, then people with dementia will be uprooted, moved, confused, traumatized. That's not compassion. He leaned forward slightly. You don't want to be the reason 80-year-olds get displaced, do you? There it was, the guilt knife. I felt it press against something tender inside me. Because I had seen what moving did to memory care residents. I had watched confusion turn into terror. I had watched fragile bodies decline after change. Daniel saw my hesitation and pounced. This doesn't have to be ugly, he said. You can retire with dignity. We can give you a package, a nice send-off. You deserve that. Alvarez's voice cut through the room. Are you offering compensation in exchange for silence? She asked. Daniel blinked. Of course not, he said quickly. I'm offering her what we offer all staff when they become inconvenient? I asked. Daniel's eyes hardened. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. Evelyn, he said, you've always been stubborn. Then, as if it were a small kindness, he added, you're also tired. You're 69. You shouldn't be carrying this. I felt anger flare, not hot, cold, because he was right about my age, but wrong about what it meant. I'm not carrying it, I said quietly. The residents are. Daniel's face tightened. Alvarez leaned slightly forward. Mr. Klein, she said, we're not here to debate. We're here to review records. We will be interviewing staff, reviewing incident and billing documentation, and tracing edits. Daniel smiled faintly, like a man who believed the system protected him. By all means, he said. Then he looked at me again, and Evelyn, he added softly, be careful. Be careful. When you set fire to a building, you're still inside it. We left his office, and my skin crawled with the certainty that he meant every word. Back at the main compliance desk area, something was happening. Nurses were moving faster than usual. Clipboards were out, People were whispering in clusters. The air had the crackle of damage control. And then I saw it, the thing that made the whole building tilt. A staff member I recognized. Tracy, a memory care aide, was crying near the medication room. The supervisor stood over her, whispering sharply. Tracy's hands shook as she signed something on a clipboard. When she looked up and saw me, her face twisted, not into anger, into pleading, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. I stepped toward her, but the supervisor blocked me, smiling too brightly. Evelyn, hi, she said. We're just updating some training acknowledgments. Routine, routine. Everything was routine until it wasn't. Alvarez's gaze moved over the clipboard like a scanner. Training acknowledgments during an active inspection? She asked. The supervisor laughed weakly. We're just staying on top of things. Alvarez held out her hand. May I? She asked. The supervisor hesitated, then handed over the clipboard. Alvarez flipped through it. I saw the first page and my stomach dropped. It wasn't training acknowledgments. It was a statement, a pre-written statement. And at the top, in bold, Employee Attestation of Documentation Practices Corporate was trying to get staff to sign that they always documented incidents properly, always administered meds correctly, always had adequate staffing. They were trying to create a shield, a paper shield made out of fear. Alvarez looked up, eyes cold. Who drafted this? She asked. The supervisor's smile cracked. I don't know, she stammered. Alvarez turned to Shaw. Photograph every page, she said. The supervisor's face drained of color. I need to call Marissa, she whispered. Alvarez nodded. Go ahead. As the supervisor rushed off, Tracy stood trembling. I stepped close enough that my voice could be quiet. Tracy, I said, what did they tell you? Her eyes filled. They said I'd lose my job, she whispered. They said I'd lose my certification. They said if I don't sign, they'll say I did things wrong. My throat tightened. Did you? I asked gently. Tracy shook her head violently. No, she whispered. But sometimes we don't have time, Evelyn. Sometimes there's one of me and 20 of them. They're yelling, wandering, hitting, crying, and you're asking me to chart like I'm sitting at a desk. I felt that familiar ache. The truth in elder care was never simple. It was always layered. System failure on top, human exhaustion beneath, and corporate profit underneath that. I know, I said quietly. I know. Tracy's eyes flicked to the agents, then back to me. She leaned in, barely moving her lips. They're deleting stuff, she whispered. My blood went cold. What stuff? I asked. Tracy swallowed. Fall reports, she said. And the level sheets. The documents that justified billing residents at higher care levels. The documents that could turn a needs reminders resident into a requires full assistance line item. More money, same staff. Who? I asked. Tracy's gaze darted toward the nurse manager's office. Then she whispered one name. Marissa. My stomach dropped again, because HR wasn't supposed to be anywhere near clinical documentation. Unless HR had become enforcement. Unless HR was the firewall between truth and money. Alvarez was still looking through the clipboard pages. I stepped toward her. Agent Alvarez, I said quietly. An aide just told me they're deleting fall reports and level of care sheets. Alvarez's eyes sharpened. Did she say who? She asked. I hesitated, because saying Marissa's name would light a fuse. Then I remembered the file in my trash, the remote admin session. The threats, they'd already lit the fuse. Yes, I said. Marissa Alvarez nodded once. Then she did something that made my heart thump. She turned to Shaw and Kent. Lockdown access, she said. We need an immediate preservation order on electronic records. Kent nodded and stepped away, already dialing someone. Shaw looked at me. Stay by Agent Alvarez, he said, and then, in the middle of the chaos, as if the building wanted to prove what kind of place it was, an alarm chimed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft, repeating tone from the memory care wing. A nurse rushed past us, eyes wide. Wander alert, she said. My breath caught. A resident had triggered an exit sensor. That meant someone had opened a secure door, or someone had slipped out behind staff, or someone had let them out. And in memory care, a few minutes could be the difference between found and frozen. Alvarez's head snapped toward the hallway. Go, she said. I didn't think, I ran. My knees didn't like it, but fear doesn't negotiate with joints. We reached the memory care wing, And the scene was chaos. A woman who once tried to go home at 2 a.m. and ended up bruised and terrified. No, I said. When was she last seen? The nurse's face crumpled. 10 minutes ago, she whispered. And the door log, Evelyn? The door log is blank. 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 The electronic record that tracked doors, open times, badge ID, was blank. Not missing. Blank. Like it had been wiped. Like someone didn't want anyone to know who opened that door. Alvarez arrived behind me, breathing steady, eyes scanning. What happened? She asked. Resident missing, the nurse said. Door log wiped too. Alvarez's gaze snapped to me for a fraction of a second. Then she turned back. Call local police, she ordered. Now, the nurse hesitated. Normally we. Now, Alvarez repeated. Staff scattered. I stood in the hallway hard hammering, and suddenly the story didn't feel like paperwork anymore. It felt like a chessboard where someone had just sacrificed a pawn to distract from the king. Because if Gloria Wexler was missing, the entire building's attention would shift. Inspectors would get pulled into safety protocol. Families would get called. Staff would stop whispering about billing fraud and focus on search procedures. It was the perfect distraction, and then my phone buzzed again. A new text. Same unknown number. Unknown. Look outside, you wanted proof. There it is. My throat went dry. I turned toward the nearest window at the end of the wing. Outside, beyond the courtyard fence, I saw movement. Small and unsteady near the tree line. A figure in a pale cardigan. Wandering. Alone. Gloria. My breath caught. And then I saw something else. A person behind the trees. Not staff. Not police. Just a silhouette. Watching her. Watching us, as if they wanted her to be seen, as if they wanted a tragedy. Alvarez stepped beside me, following my gaze. What is it? She asked. I didn't answer with words. I pointed. Alvarez's entire posture changed. Shaw, she barked into her radio. We have eyes on the resident outside the perimeter. Possible second individual near the tree line. Move. Everything exploded into motion. Doors opening, staff shouting, radios crackling. I stared out the window, frozen, because one thought kept looping in my mind like a siren. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. A message delivered through an 88-year-old woman who couldn't even remember her own address. If you're still watching, subscribe to Stories Untold right now, because part 3 is where the masked corporate system gets a face, and Evelyn finds out who's been texting her. Outside, Gloria took another step toward the trees, and the silhouette behind the trees shifted, moving closer. Alvarez's voice was sharp, controlled. Do not let her reach that tree line, she said. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. They weren't just erasing logs. They were willing to risk a life to erase the truth. Hit subscribe if these true-to-life stories matter to you, and comment where you're watching from so more people see what happens to our elders behind closed doors. Gloria Wexler's pale cardigan moved like a ghost at the edge of the tree line. For a second, the world narrowed to that. An 88-year-old woman with dementia, shuffling toward the woods she didn't understand, while a dark shape watched from the trees. Then everything snapped back into motion. Get her, I heard myself say. Agent Renee Alvarez was already speaking into her radio, voice clipped and controlled. Shaw, Kent, we have the resident in visual range outside the perimeter, near the south tree line. Unknown second subject in proximity. Approach from the east. Keep her between you and the building. Do not spook her. Staff poured out the side doors toward the courtyard gate, some running, some shaking. I moved too, though my knees protested. Age didn't matter, not right now. By the time we reached the exit, a maintenance worker had unlocked the gate and a nurse was jogging across the grass, calling out in a bright, shaky voice. Gloria, sweetheart, wait. It's almost dinner time. Gloria stopped, turned her head slightly, eyes unfocused. She looked at the building like it was a stranger. I looked beyond her toward the trees. The silhouette was gone. Did you see that? I asked Alvarez. Yes, she said. But we're not going to chase shadows and leave her exposed. 2 staff members reached Gloria, one on each side, moving slow, arms open like they were approaching a skittish animal. Hey, Ms. Wexler, one of them said. You left your sweater inside. Come on, it's chilly. Gloria frowned. I'm late for school, she murmured. Mother will be angry. Mother will be angry. The words hit me like a brick, because dementia freezes people in old fears. It doesn't care what year it is. They turned her gently back toward the building. Behind us, local police sirens grew louder. Within minutes, squad cars pulled up, lights flickering silently at the curb. Officers stepped out, taking statements, checking the perimeter, scanning the woods. One officer approached Agent Alvarez, nodded respectfully, and began speaking in low tones. I stood by the door, heart slowly returning to a rhythm that didn't feel like a drumline in my throat. For a brief, fragile moment, relief washed through me. Gloria was alive. She was confused, frightened, but she was alive. Then my phone buzzed again. Same number, unknown. See, accidents happen. Imagine how this looks on your precious reports. My hand tightened around the device, because that text confirmed what my gut already knew. This hadn't been bad luck. It had been timing, weaponized. Alvarez saw my face and stepped closer. Another message, she asked. I showed her the screen, her jaw clenched. Save it, she said. And after today, consider that every move you make is being watched, online and off. I thought about that as the chaos ebbed and routines tried to reassert themselves. Because in elder care, people always try to drag things back to routine. Dinner must be served. Meds must be passed. Showers must be given. Even when the truth had exploded like a bomb in the middle of the building. By 6 o'clock, residents were back in the dining room. Staff were moving through their motions, and the sirens were gone. But nothing was normal. Not really. Not anymore. Alvarez and her team gathered in conference room, a bigger than the one we'd used earlier, with glass walls that made everything feel like a fishbowl. They asked me to join. When I walked in, I saw more faces at the table. A woman in a dark suit with a Department of Justice badge clipped to her belt. Two state health department officials. A man I recognized from corporate, the chief financial officer, Harold Latham, flown in from headquarters looking like someone who'd just been told the plane might not land. Daniel Klein and Marissa Vaughn sat on one side of the table, stiff and silent. Alvarez motioned for me to sit near the end. The DOJ attorney spoke first. Miss Carter, she said, we're here because your documentation raised serious red flags. What we're seeing now, possible record tampering, pressure on staff to sign attestations, and a near-miss elopement incident while logs are blank, changes the scope. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. This isn't just about sloppy paperwork anymore, she continued. This may be criminal. Daniel shifted in his chair. With respect, he said, one resident wandering is not. It's not just one resident. Alvarez interrupted. It's a pattern of suppressed incidents, falsified staffing reports, and misaligned billing. The only reason we know as much as we do is because Miss Carter didn't let you bury it. He glared at me like I'd burned his house down. The DOJ attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Liu, turned back to me. Ms. Carter, she said, I'm going to ask you some focused questions now. Your answers will be recorded and may be used in future proceedings. Are you comfortable proceeding without legal representation of your own? I hesitated, because I'd watched enough courtroom dramas to know that was supposed to be a red flag. But then I remembered something from earlier in the day. Alvarez had said I was not the target, and deep down I knew why. I hadn't signed the falsified attestations. I hadn't erased logs. I hadn't threatened anyone. I nodded. Yes, I said. I'm comfortable. Good, Liu replied. Tell me, in as much detail as you can, when you first noticed that incidents involving residents were being downgraded or omitted. As I spoke, the pieces clicked into place. Not just for me, but for everyone at the table. I talked about Martha James's fall that never made it into the official log, about Harold Bishop's insulin and the perfect MAR that didn't match his blood sugar, about families being told aging instead of missed care. I described watching staffing schedules get adjusted on paper to meet requirements they never met in reality. I referenced specific emails, directives, and screenshots that showed how corporate pushed facilities to reduce negative outcomes by manipulating categories, not by improving care. And as I talked, Liu's questions drilled deeper. Who instructed you to align your incident classifications with corporate expectations? How are staff coached to describe injuries? Who had authority to edit or delete entries once they were submitted? When you raised concerns, how did leadership respond? Each time, the pattern emerged clearer. Corporate cared about numbers, Blue Harbor facilities cared about survival, but nobody with power seemed to care about the residents. When I finished, the room was quiet. Lou looked at Daniel. "Mr. Klein," she said, "do you dispute any of Miss Carter's description of events?" He smiled thinly. "I think Evelyn is interpreting things through a very narrow lens," he said. "Healthcare is complex. Documentation systems are imperfect. We coach staff to avoid misclassification, that's all." There was never any intention to mislead regulators or defraud programs. Lou's face didn't move. "Do you deny directing staff to recode incidents to reduce reportable events?" she asked. Daniel's eyes flicked to Marissa. Marissa stared straight ahead, fingers white around a pen. "I deny any intent to deceive," Daniel said. That wasn't the question. Lou noted something. Then she turned to Marissa. "It's standard HR practice to remind staff of policies, and those forms weren't policy acknowledgments." Alvarez cut in. They were retroactive cover letters. Marissa blinked helplessly. "I was following instructions," she said. "From whom?" Lou asked. Silence, then finally, "Corporate operations," Marissa whispered. "And Daniel." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "Marissa," he said sharply. Lou raised a hand. "That's enough for now," she said. "We're not going to litigate this in a conference room." She turned back to me. "Miss Carter," she said, "you've taken significant personal risk to preserve and share these records. That matters." Her tone softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not going to pretend the next few months will be easy," she added. "There will be interviews, subpoenas, pushback. But you are protected as a cooperating witness and potential whistleblower. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "but understanding and absorbing are different things." Because in that moment, the reality landed fully. I wasn't just a difficult older employee anymore. I was the person who could help put people in prison. After the meeting, as the officials dispersed, Alvarez caught up to me in the hallway. "Walk with me," she said. We stepped into a quieter corner near the staff break room. "I want you to go home tonight with someone you trust," she said. "Don't drive alone. Don't answer any unexpected knocks on your door. If anything feels off, you call 911 and then call me." My chest tightened. "You think they'd—" I started. "I think people who are willing to use an 88-year-old dementia patient as a distraction are capable of worse," she said. Her eyes held mine. "Take them seriously," she added. "But don't let them scare you silent." On my way back to my desk, a figure stepped out of the medication room. Jason Pike. He looked even paler than before, hands shoved into his pockets like he was trying to keep them from shaking. "Evelyn," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was close. "I need to tell you something. My defenses went up." "Are you the one erasing logs?" I asked bluntly. His eyes went wide. "No," he said. "I mean, technically yes, but not like that." He rubbed his forehead. "That sounded bad," he muttered. "Let me start over." He took a breath. "They've been giving me cleanup jobs for months," he said. "Corporate tickets, remote sessions with scripts, optimize reports, correct anomalies. I figured it was data integrity, you know? But today," he swallowed. "Today they told me to clear the door logs for the memory care exit." My skin went cold. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. "Corporate liaison," he said. But the request came from Harold Latham's office, the CFO. Jason continued. "They said it was an error, that the system had mislogged badge swipes, and they didn't want it confusing auditors," he said. "But when the Wander alarm went off and I saw the blank log, you realized there was no error." He looked up at me, eyes desperate. "I didn't clear it," he said. "I stalled. I told them the server was busy. But someone with higher credentials went in from the corporate side and did it anyway. I could see the session." "Can you prove that?" I asked. He nodded. "I screenshotted the session trace," he said. "Printed it. And He stopped swallowing. "And I texted you," he admitted. My hand tightened around my phone. "That was you," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "I wanted to warn you to stop digging, not because I wanted you to quit. Because I was scared of what they'd do if you didn't." Anger flared hot and complicated. "You sent me to look out the window," I said. "To see Gloria. I wanted you to see how bad it was," he said. "I wanted you to have proof it wasn't just paperwork." I stared at him. "You nearly gave me a heart attack," I said. I nearly gave myself one, he replied weakly. But if you hadn't seen her out there, they would have called it a minor incident. They would have said she never left the building. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, and pressed them into my hand. Give this to Agent Alvarez, he said. I already emailed her a copy from an anonymous account. But this is insurance. I looked down at the papers. Session logs, timestamps, corporate IP addresses. It was the digital equivalent of catching someone with their hand in the shredder. Jason, I said slowly, you know this could cost you your job. He gave a humorless laugh. Jobs come and go, he said. My mom is on Medicaid in another facility. If this is how they're cooking numbers here, what do you think is happening there? There it was again. The quiet, heavy grief of adult children watching their parents disappear in places that look safe on brochures. I squeezed the papers. Thank you, I said. He nodded and slipped back into the medication room, shoulders hunched. That night I didn't go home alone. My neighbor, Grace, a retired teacher with a sharp tongue and a fiercer sense of justice, insisted on riding shotgun. If they want to mess with you, she said, they can deal with me too. I've had 50 years of experience yelling at principals. We drove home with the radio off and my phone face down in the console. At home, I pulled out the box from my closet, the one labeled just in case in my own handwriting. Inside were printed copies of emails, incident drafts, billing sheets, and notes I'd taken over the past year. I divided them into 2 stacks, one to keep at home, one to give fully to Alvarez. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from corporate, it was this: redundancy keeps things alive. Over the next weeks, everything blurred. There were more interviews. Some at the facility, some at a downtown office that smelled like coffee and photocopier toner. I sat across from people in suits who asked calm, invasive questions about things that felt ordinary to me, but horrifying to them. How often did staff work double shifts? How frequently were 2-person assists done by 1 aide? How many times did you see billing codes increased without matching care plans? Each time I answered as precisely as my memory allowed. Because they already had the documents. They needed context. Meanwhile, news began to leak. Families whispered in hallways. Local news vans parked outside the building more often. A few brave children of residents went on camera, voices shaking, saying things like, "We trusted them." Daniel stopped smiling entirely. He showed up less. When he did, he moved quickly, eyes scanning, phone glued to his hand. Marissa resigned for personal reasons 2 weeks into the investigation. Harold Latham tried to distance himself, giving statements about isolated breakdowns at the facility level and our unwavering commitment to elders. Then the day came when Agent Alvarez called me, voice different, more formal. "Evelyn," she said, "I wanted you to hear this from me before you see it on the news. The U.S. Attorney's Office is filing charges." My heart thudded once hard. "Against who?" I asked. "3 individuals," she said. Regional Director Daniel Klein, Chief Financial Officer Harold Latham, and a corporate operations executive who authorized the documentation alignment directives across multiple facilities. I sat down at my kitchen table. "What charges?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud," she said, "making false statements related to healthcare benefit programs, obstruction of a federal healthcare investigation, and in Daniel's case, an enhancement related to reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult, tied to the circumstances of Ms. Wexler's elopement." My throat closed. "Will they go to prison?" I asked. "That's up to the courts," she said. "But they're facing substantial time and fines if convicted." "And the company?" I asked. "Blue Harbor is entering into a civil settlement," she said. "They'll pay significant penalties, accept federal monitoring, and implement corrective measures under government oversight. It's painful money." She paused. "But they're not being shut down," she added, "in large part because of your documentation and willingness to cooperate. Regulators believe the system can be corrected without displacing all those residents." I exhaled slowly, because that had been my greatest fear, that in trying to protect people, I'd get them thrown out of their homes. "And me?" I asked quietly. "You're being formally recognized as a whistleblower," she said. "Your job is protected under federal statutes." The company is barred from taking adverse actions against you in retaliation for your cooperation. I laughed once, sharp and strange. They were about to force me to retire the day you walked in, I said. I know, she replied. That fact will be part of our narrative if anyone argues this was a disgruntled employee situation. I thought about Tom, about Nina, about all the people who'd been transitioned quietly. What happens to them? I asked. The past terminations, she clarified. Yes, that may come up in civil cases, she said. Some of them may have claims. Lawyers will be busy. For the first time, my anger wasn't just hot, it was useful, because now I knew the machine could bleed. A month later, I stood in a very different building, not Blue Harbor, a hotel conference center in downtown Milwaukee, carpeting patterned like a migraine, ceiling too low, lights too bright, a banner read, Midwest Long-Term Care Compliance Summit. I was supposed to speak. The idea made my stomach twist. Public speaking had never been a career ambition. But the invitation had come through Alvarez. They need to hear from someone who actually did it, she'd said. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had once needed to hear from me, and hadn't. So I stood backstage with shaking hands. Index cards in my pocket I knew I wouldn't use, and a room full of compliance officers, nurse managers, and administrators waiting. A conference organizer whispered, "You're up." I walked out. The room went quiet. I told them my name, my age, my job title. Then I told them about the calendar invite that said transition conversation, about the badge printer, about the federal lanyard, about the file in the trash. I told them about residents whose injuries were reclassified as age-related, about aides forced to sign papers they didn't understand, about near misses that were inches from tragedies. I told them about the text from an unknown number that turned out to be a terrified IT kid who couldn't look away anymore. I did not sugarcoat any of it. When I finished, I expected polite applause. Instead, there was a stillness. Then slowly, someone in the back stood and clapped. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, applause crashing like waves. They weren't clapping because I was special. They were clapping because they were tired, because they'd sat in offices just like mine, holding reports that didn't match reality, being told to get on board. Afterward, people lined up to speak to me. A nurse manager with tears in her eyes said, "I thought I was crazy." A compliance officer said, "My CEO calls me negative when I bring him things like this." An aide who'd paid out of pocket to attend whispered, "I didn't think anyone would believe me if I spoke up. Now I know I'm not alone." Their stories didn't fix anything by themselves, but they meant something. We weren't ghosts yelling into the wind. We were a chorus. Back at Blue Harbor, things changed, slowly, imperfectly. Under the terms of the settlement, a new leadership structure was installed. The board hired an interim CEO with a background in geriatric nursing, not private equity. They created an independent compliance and resident safety office, reporting directly to the board, not operations. They offered me the role, Vice President of Resident Safety and Compliance, the letter said. Full authority to halt any practice you deem unsafe or non-compliant. I read it twice, then a third time. On paper, it was everything I'd wanted, but I was tired. Not the kind of tired that a vacation could fix. The kind that lives in the bones of a 70-year-old woman who has spent too long being ignored. So I walked into the interim CEO's office, a woman named Dr. Leanne Harper with clear eyes and a no-nonsense posture, and put the offer letter on her desk. "Thank you," I said, but no, she studied me. "May I ask why?" she said. "Because this job will eat the rest of my life," I said. "And I have grandchildren I'd like to actually see," she smiled faintly. "I respect that," she said. "Will you at least consider a part-time advisory role for a year? Help us build the systems right this time. On your terms, that I could live with." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "On my terms." She extended her hand. "On your terms," she echoed. In the months that followed, I worked fewer hours but with more power than I'd ever had. We installed uneditable audit trails on incident reports. We implemented anonymous staff reporting channels that bypass local leadership. We brought in family councils and gave them real teeth, access to data, not just reassurance. Not every problem vanished. Humans were still human. People still forgot, cut corners, got tired, but there was less room to hide malice, less room to bury the truth under euphemisms. On my last official day as an advisor, I walked through the memory care wing one more time. Gloria was in a recliner by the window, blanket over her knees, humming some tune from the 1940s. She didn't know who I was. She wouldn't remember that she'd once walked almost into the trees, because adults who were supposed to protect her cared more about numbers than about her heartbeat. But I remembered, and I would keep remembering even when the rest of the world wanted to move on. "Hi, Ms. Wexler," I said softly. "It's Evelyn." She looked at me, eyes cloudy, then smiled. "You have kind eyes," she murmured. My throat tightened. "Some days," I said. That night I sat at my modest kitchen table, drinking tea from a chipped mug, and opened my laptop. Not to file a report, to write an email to Agent Renee Alvarez, subject. "Thank you," I kept it short. "I just wanted to say that what you did mattered. Not just for me, but for people who can't speak for themselves. When they tell you these cases are overblown or rare, remember Gloria. Remember that door log. Remember Jason. Don't let them convince you the storm was just drizzle." I hovered over send for a second, then clicked. A reply came the next day. "Evelyn, we don't forget people like Gloria, or people like you." Cases like this become the examples we use to train new agents what to look for when the numbers don't add up. You help change how we see long-term care facilities. That's not small. Enjoy your grandchildren. R. Alvarez. I closed the laptop. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine days that weren't built around other people's emergencies. Afternoons at the park. Phone calls that weren't crises. Silence that didn't feel like waiting for another shoe to drop. But some nights, when the house is too quiet and the wind hits the windows just wrong, I still think about that calendar invite. Transition conversation. They thought it would be the end of my story. They thought I'd walk into that room, sign whatever they put in front of me, and disappear into the statistics. Another older woman stepping aside. Instead, it became something else. A starting gun, a warning, a line I refuse to cross. If you're watching this and you work in a place like Blue Harbor, if you've seen charts rewritten, logs corrected, or elders treated like numbers, remember this. You are not crazy, you are not alone, and you are not powerless just because you have gray hair or tired feet. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who remembers everything. This is Stories Untold. If Evelyn's story hit you in the gut, tap like so more families see it. Subscribe so you never miss what they don't want you to hear. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from and who you're fighting for